Good evening and warm welcome today to all of you tuning into us and our live broadcast from Mumbai. And I'm here and very delighted to welcome a familiar face in our industry and in our country. Probably people would say across the world as well. Somebody who needs very little introduction, but I would like to just mention a couple of things which are not usually quoted. Besides being the top 50 women in business in Asia, in India, whether it's Forbes, whether it's Fortune, or any other measure that happens in our industry. I also wanted to mention a couple of things that probably go a long way for all of us, particularly for me, because I've had the privilege of working with her, and I'm emphasizing working with her. While we were together at Fidelity Asset Management. And she taught us that leadership is about working together and not working for. So I never say that I worked for Ashu, I say I worked with Ashu. So it is such a privilege and a great pleasure to have you, Ashu, here. And a warm welcome from FPSB.
Thank you, Rajesh. It's a sheer delight being here today.
Thank you, Ashu. We all know that, and we all wished well for you. We were all expecting you to be with us during the World Financial Planning Day, but in a way, I feel certain things happen for the better, for the good. I would see the positive side of it. We have an extended celebration of World Financial Planning Day from 6 to 8 as well in India. And added to the fact that we are still within the entire world celebrating the World Investor Week, and that's from 4th of October to 10th of October, thanks to the initiatives of IOSCO. So we have a great topic up for you, and I mean, couldn't think of a better person than you to discuss this matter. And I just dropped a message to a lot of our common friends and friends in the industry that we often underestimate ethics and what it can do and the power it has as we build, a bigger, brighter, better future. So I thought, let me start with that, Ashu, and let me bring in the first thought for the day and a question to you to get your wisdom. And we all go back, much more evolved after an hour's discussion with you. So I think the first and foremost thing that comes into all of our minds is that investor protection is always connected to regulation. It's always seen as a point that the regulator prescribes what is investor protection. We just have to go with that. But I thought there is a lot more to it. So I thought probably that could be a great way to start the conversation, and we'll see how it builds up.
Yeah. No, thanks, Rajesh. And indeed, this topic is one that's very close to my heart. So very happy to share my thoughts. I think it's a complete misnomer that investor protection starts with the regulator, and it is the regulator's job only to protect investors. To my mind, the starting point of investor protection is about doing the right thing and not giving into greed or fear. We've seen this time and again. Great corporations fall either because they're driven by greed or by fear. And small institutions grow to become very large because they just focus on doing the right thing. And you have great examples all over the world and in India of both the fallen angels and the stars of today that were not even known in the past. So to my mind, that's where it all starts. But there are two other very important things. And to my mind, this is for the entire ecosystem that is associated with the world of investments. If you do the right thing, then you're not going to really need to run around trying to protect the investor, because presumably you're doing it all the while. Having said that, the markets evolve, right? New products come up. There's a lot of innovation. And you can't predict the future, right? And that's so true for regulators, because often they are in reactive mode because somebody's thought up this great product, and then, come crisis time, all things break loose. And that's where I believe being very aware of the risks and talking about it, that this could happen and watch out, and what are the early signs, are very important, which is where disclosures come in. And I don't think you need a regulator to tell somebody, please be true to label and disclose what you're doing. And the final thing, and this is where I think the gap is, and which is why everybody turns to the regulators, it's about taking timely action. We as individuals, and it's individuals that manage these businesses, know that something's gone wrong. They don't need to be told by anybody. And to my mind, that's the third aspect. It's about taking timely corrective action. Because if these three things are adhered to, then I truly believe investor will be the uppermost in people's minds all the time.
And that's one of the famous sayings as well, right? The customer is the king and the boss. He is one person who can fire everyone, right?
Yeah.
From the person below to the chairman, just by moving his business away, right? So it just rings back on that fundamental thought that, you've got to take care of the end client. And I mean, Ashu, you did mention, couple of stakeholders as you spoke about it. We spoke about the regulator, we spoke about the intermediary. We also spoke about, of course, the customer, because it is the investor who is there at the end of the day. So other than the manufacturers of the products, other than the people who give these services, other than people who put the regulation out there, there could be more stakeholders, right? Or do you think that that's the end of the list, or there could be more?
I don't think that's the end of the list. To me, every single participant in the whole ecosystem has the responsibility. So if I take the asset management industry, of course, it's the responsibility beyond the regulator of the asset management company and the whole distribution fraternity. But I think it's also the responsibility of the registrar and transfer agent, of the fund accountant, the custodian, because unless and until each and every aspect works in the interest of investors, something is going to give away, as well as information providers and valuation agencies. And be it the global financial crisis or over the last 18 months, as the world has battled the pandemic, these aspects have really come to light, as well as the stock exchanges.
Yes.
Because end of the day, if you have a glitch there or a problem there, then, all hell will break loose. So which is why, to my mind, there is so much of focus just on the manufacturer and the seller that it all gets lost. Another thing that I've begun to see increasingly, and in all of this, I do believe somewhere the role of financial planners, advisors, distributors takes a very, very important position, simply because often they are the last mile connect. And there is the debate that's a global one. And I know over the last couple of years in India over execution only and only advisory. I think the bit to watch out is where distributors or investment advisors become product manufacturers. And then these product manufacturers really go out of the ambit of traditional regulation. And somewhere that really perhaps needs attention. And to my mind, that's one stakeholder that's not often thought about as a product manufacturer.
Interesting. we do have a lot of evolution happening as well. Like you rightly said, there's a lot of innovation, and particularly in India, if I look at it, even the Reserve Bank has put in a sandbox for innovation. There is an innovation cell at the Reserve Bank.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if all the regulators follow suit. I think SEBI is considering some of those aspects. But while you did make that point, that certain stakeholders may involuntarily get left out, or certain stakeholders may not be in the radar right now, but should be in the radar very soon. That's a very interesting point, because similar to this being in the radar or outside of the radar, there is also the other element to the definition of who this investor is at the end of the day. I think if I look at it, largely when we talk about investor protection, most regulations think of the common man, at least to start with. The general public, the citizens of the country, the common man. But this attribution, I thought, is only partial, because I'm aware that we are all aware that you were championing, leading a fairly large credit rating agency, plus a lot of services that go to institutions. But I'm sure there are many stories in your life wherein you would have made sure that the investor, who is probably the institution on the other side, is also equally protected. So, what are those? Could you just take us through some of those?
Happy to share some of these incidences and stories that have actually shaped my career and my thinking. Very early on, and I go back to banking days, the simple thought that everything that one does is towards protecting the interest of the depositors at one level is so basic. But, when I saw some of the stuff happening recently with the PMC Bank, or, years ago on GTB, you kind of ask yourself, how come something basic has gotten forgotten? And to my mind, for me at least, back to the 80s, the word "be prudent about what you do" has remained and has been pretty much a driving force, I would say, even as I made a lot of decisions. And I remember early on at that time, a number of products which were innovative had to be called off or taken off from the shelf, because somewhere as a bank, you cannot put depositor money at risk, right? When I then think about, what's happening even today, or what I've experienced on the asset management time, for whatever it is worth, the reality is an insurance company is an investor, right?
Yes.
FIIs are investors, AMCs are investors, and they carry huge amount of fiduciary duty for and on behalf of the people whose money they manage. And a lot gets covered under fiduciary, but you know what? It's just investor protection, to simply call it out. And I remember the time when this whole Satyam issue had happened, and proxy voting or a mutual fund exercising their voting rights was not common. And we just said, we are going to get to the bottom of it. And the moment one organization takes a view, several other follow. And you can make the whole machinery move, government regulators towards resolution.
Understood.
And the moment you show up at these meetings on the basis that you're doing so in your fiduciary capacity, the lens is very different and you get heard. And to my mind, that should be the lens that should drive everything. And then when I think about the world of information services or ratings, by God's grace, I've always had the privilege of working with some of the best institutions. But the simple thing and common to these have been about doing the right thing. And what's kept this large rating agency, almost in a class of its own, is simply about allowing the whole organization to function on that principle, having the right checks and balances, and ensuring no interference. Because the moment power is used towards swaying any decision in one direction, you end up in a compromise situation. So, I would say when you act on behalf of the investor, do so entirely on behalf of that investor as an investor yourself. Right? Second, never throw caution or prudence to the winds, because the day you do that, things will fall like a stack of cards. And we've seen that through probably every crisis event. And the final thing is about ensuring that you use power in a sensible way with balance. Power is meant to really steer the ship, not to change course when it's anyway going in the right direction.
Wow. I think, probably that's why the ratings are the most powerful people in the world, include people like you who say where that power has to be used. I think that's evidence to the fact that, powerful doesn't mean that you exert power in undue ways and sway the end result. So great sharing, Ashu. I'm making some notes along the way, but I will catch the recording again on YouTube and make more notes. And I'll focus on my questions. So coming forward from here, so which means, there is also the element then that connects to the communication, because what you just mentioned very clearly points to the fact that how do you, at the end of the day, communicate what you have decided, whether you are going to use or misuse that power. Finally, the communication to the investor makes a big difference. So, that first communication, whether it is from a product service, a service provider or a product manufacturer, or like you said, even a financial institution representing the end investors. That first communication when it comes to even normal day-to-day business or probably even time of crisis matters a lot. So what have been your experiences there, particularly on communicating?
So communication is the most important tool any organization has in connecting with all its stakeholders. And the old adage of communicate, 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 and saying it n number of times also falls short is very true. See, when you are launching a product, right, that's the time you put your best foot forward. And often that best foot forward, unfortunately, is not only about talking about features of the product, but covering risk factors and doing it in a very simple way. My biggest frustration is providers of products or services take cover under jargon. And that's where you don't communicate, you create a communication gap. So it's very, very important to cover features, risk factors in very simple language and reiterate. And when there is a change, don't leave it to somebody's imagination on what the change is. I remember from one of a previous sort of a product launch where we're completely we've done the presentation and people were very happy about the product, and I had an elderly gentleman, probably mid 60s, stand up and ask the question saying, I'm very excited about this product. Would you recommend that I invest in it? And I said, as a manufacturer, I cannot recommend, but I've spoken about it. But you will remember that I have pointed out some risk factors, and keeping that in mind and your risk appetite, given your age bracket, I would really urge that you don't consider this offering. And I remember the pin drop silence in the hall. And truly, if it's a product around turnarounds, it is high risk. And as a manufacturer, if you shy away from talking about it, how can you expect the whole wealth management community to talk about it? And if you ask me, that response perhaps got everybody looking at that product differently, and that did not come in the way of the success. In fact, if you ask me, it only took up its success a couple of notches. I want to give a second example, taking a leaf out of the insurance industry's books, and this probably applies as a theme to all products, right? In our country, as everywhere in the world, there are frequent tax changes.
Yes.
Who communicates to the end investor? When it's marketed, you talk about it as tax-free. Now, if an investor's done a invest, forget it, shut it, the investor doesn't know what has hit her or him. And even as somebody who I'd like to believe I know financial services and I understand financial products, the 2012 tax change on treatment of maturity proceeds of insurance policies, I don't think even today everybody knows about it. And we've been through another change in the recent budget.
Yes, yes.
And the worst part, and nobody will say this, and I hope there are enough financial advisors listening in, because I know I've said goodbye to several providers on account of this. It's not, the proceeds means that you get taxed twice over, because it's the premium as well as the gain. So you pay from taxed money and you get taxed on it. The question is, whose job is it to communicate? And that's why I talk about the ecosystem, right? It's right. The job of manufacturer, and it is ongoing communication. And to me, the biggest gap, apart from the jargon, is it isn't ongoing. It's when it is convenient. And that is perhaps not the right thing.
Many lessons for us, Ashu, for all of us, in the sense we just can't think of communication as and when we want. And I know that it's a trigger in most of the larger organizations, wherein there is a set routine, there is a set pattern, but that's for the routine business. I mean, like, if I were a consumer of a credit card, I'm sure every month I'll get my statement before the due date. 5 days before, I'll get a message that it's due in 5 days, and all of that will happen. But for example, if terms and conditions change, at least now we get an email which says that these were the terms, and we're changing the terms to the new one. But we get, we get what are the new terms, but we don't quite get what were the earlier ones which got changed. So,
that's right.
so I hope my credit cards don't get cancelled after this show. Well, coming to that, on products, I spoke about credit card involuntary. It just came up, but that was a question I had reserved particularly for a session like this. Everybody talks about design thinking today, also about experiencing your own product or service delivery as if you were a consumer, and then you decide, would you want to go out and give it. In some ways, I felt that while all of that thinking and that maturity is great, sometimes you can also design to trap, right? So my question was, have you come across such designs where, investor protection is actually literally, shown the door? Do you have a different view?
I'd like to believe that the design is not about gypping the investor, right? I think I would like to give the whole ecosystem that much of credit. The big issue is in implementation and in disclosures. I think that's where everything falls short. And there are so many examples, right? You think of the world of insurance, where disclosures are nowhere as much as the asset management world. And you only know quite much later on what's happening to your portfolio. And then you begin to realize that this is not what you signed up for, right? Because a lot is in the fine print. Or if you think about pension funds, they are your life savings. And you even think about the nomenclature. Right now, was there something wrong in the design? No, because by definition, it's meant for a payout when earning capacity is less. So it is more protection oriented. It's less risky. But from the name to say, it is wealth creation oriented, you have no idea that only a very small percentage is equities. Or when you think it is risk protected, you actually expect to see no risk. And you end up facing a huge swing, actually. Or when I think about money market funds, because that's come under so much of discussion, who would expect to see a 30-year GSEC in a money market fund? I mean, that's meant to be literally, for why 1 month? It should be 1 day and 2 days, or liquid funds, as it's popularly called. I don't think that's what's written in the offer document. People sort of begin to be smart and think that, I've said this, I can take cover because, the word is largely.
Understand.
Right now, the word largely is to address that exception. And exceptions are exceptions and not to become the rule. So to my mind, the thief is implementation, or the theft is in the implementation. So execution and implementation is, to my mind, most important and far more important than the product design. And if there are changes, there should be comparison, because I recall a time when the asset management industry went through a lot of schemes being merged. Just when you had settled down to 2 schemes, those 2 schemes merged into the third, and it became another name. And statements, and that's why I spoke about the ecosystem. Different providers, your distributor, the RTA, all, and NSDL, all carried different names. And for the life of the investor, you would not know which went into which scheme, right? So you thought you invested in something, and what you're left with holding is completely different. And again, I don't think the merger was a bad idea, right? It's about how it was communicated and how did that message land. And at that time, was it fair to again merge in a couple of months? That's, to my mind, the issue. And I would not attribute this to any design thinking, let me tell you.
So we can have perfect designs, but perfect designs can be tweaked and exceptions created where maybe the design itself is brought to question. I mean, it just set me thinking on many other examples that came to my mind, but I'll reserve that and give you more opportunities to talk today. We don't always get you on shows, so it's our privilege. Let me just come back to us, FPSB. One of the key things that we always propagate and we insist and we do hold ourselves and our heads very high when we talk about ethics. And somewhere across the world, and it's a great setting because it's World Financial Planning Day, World Investor Week. There's so many countries coming together, almost 190,000 plus professionals participating. We've made this a celebration in its 5th year while working with IOS Group. So I was reflecting on this because when we rang the bell at BSc 2 days ago, many of our friends in the industry who are CFP professionals, some of them are journalists, some of them write, they've written books. So a lot of well-wishers, send messages of, happiness, congratulating and all that. And at the same time, everybody said that, somewhere it also shows up when a brand stands for ethics and responsibility, then naturally when it starts, waking up, it gets an automatic acceptance in the country. But I didn't want to take that as a compliment. I wanted to take that as a statement of responsibility that we have to carry for the future. So I wanted to dwell on that. Particularly the emphasis on ethics is so much so that for financial planning professionals, particularly, and you touched upon fiduciary as well, because that is expected that you put the interest of the client in the middle of everything, and not just that, you put that interest ahead of everything. So when you look at it from that point of view, Ashu, could you relate to any of your life experiences where that ethics stood you apart, or your organization apart, or something that you were associated with apart, and allowed you to probably get that acceptance from any of the stakeholders? Are there some things that you would like to share?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. One linked to how ethics in the world of financial planning can make a huge difference, right? In the last couple of months, with so much of volatility, if you really want to look at investments which are time bound because there is a financial goal, and when the financial advisor knows it, they have within themselves the ability to do the right thing or sell the products they have on the shelf because it's about commissions. The choice is with the financial advisor, right? I had this very pleasant experience where, a financial advisor, and, often banks are blamed for not being good advisor. In this particular instance, it was really heartwarming, where, my RM said, I'd advise you not to make any investments. Just leave it in the savings account. And he simply said, And he added, it need not be my bank, it can be any bank, but these are the kind of rates. Because if you just look at what money market funds are making, what the outlook on interest rates are, what arbitrage funds are doing, it's just not worth taking the risk. You know, that discussion is going to ensure that I continue to work with this advisor and also recommend the advisor to many more people.
Absolutely.
So to my mind, it's not the rules or the regulations that matter, but the moral code. And nobody writes the moral code. Ethics is the moral code. See, when you are a certified financial professional, right, a CFP or somebody who's been through the training, I think it's fair to assume that as a practitioner, you should know the detail versus the investor, because that's why you're the practitioner, right? In fact, that's the only difference if you ask me.
Yeah.
And that's why you are receiving some fees. You
Yes.
can be within the rules, but lie through your teeth. Or you can forget all the rules, but just play it right. And to my mind, that's one place where I think, and this makes you customer for a life, actually. The second example, and I'll kind of reiterate about this greed and fear, and it is true that everybody is driven by greed and fear. So it's very hard not to fall into that trap. What makes it easy? If you follow first principles. And unlinked to the investment industry, I had an experience at a client meeting where, our going in position was, this is not good business to do.
Okay.
Right? At the same point, you want to hear the customer out. Customer is king, and that should not be forgotten even when you have to say no. And at that meeting, the way it played out was doing that particular assignment meant big gains.
Mm.
And as the conversation progressed, the gains only got bigger. And the resolve of my team and me was stronger to say no. And it's always graceful to walk away and say, we'll come back, and very politely say no. And this particular trait is very true of my previous employer, Crystal, and that's what makes it stand apart through the innumerous incidences which would have happened in the ratings industry, or even when you think about their other services, be it research or analytics.
Yes.
It's the ability to say no gracefully because you're operating on first principles. And to my mind, it's very important that, variable pay or compensation philosophy, because whether it is fees for a distributor or an employee in a company, if they are also aligned to first principles, it makes a huge difference. And that's why I talk about the ecosystem being responsible rather than just the regulator or the product provider.
Amazing. So that brings me to a lot of intertwining here, because you have professional conduct, you have ethics, you also have, ultimately both of it contributing to investor protection. It's a perfect blend that way, all put together. Great, Ashu. Thanks for sharing that. I had two more questions.
Okay.
I think we will be still on time, and we would not take more time than what we have asked from you. I mean, allow me to go back to our fidelity days. I kind of, thought that's a great, that's how I started introducing you. So might as well throw in a question. Usually, it's rare that you get to question your bosses. So now I'm able to do it in public.
Then also, Rajesh.
So I was actually reminded of our first fund launch and the subsequent launches. I know vividly recollect that we used to go in and discuss this with compliance and not with you. That's the secret. We used to say, what kind of compliance is this? Nowhere in the SEBI regulation is written that exit load has to be credited to the investor, to the pool. The exit load in the industry was being paid out back to the distributor who got the customer. So it's not about whether that's right, wrong at that point in time. At that point in time, when you are part of business development and sales, you're trying to look at what's written in the law, and therefore are you complying with the law. And here you had a situation where you are above the law, not in a negative way, but in a positive way. And that is what later we realized is Fidelity's best practice. That the exit load of the investor collected from exiting investors would be credited back to those who stay, because those who stay need to be rewarded for their patience and the perseverance with respect to the scheme's objective. So that's a great story, and not just a story, it's a reality, it's a fact. And we know after a few years, this became regulation. So, I mean, somewhere I was going back at that, and it brought me to this concept of stewardship. Would you have more experiences to share? And this is something I experienced. So
yeah,
you have more.
So stewardship is the responsibility of everybody, not just the leader. Right? The leader does set the tone, and nothing really ends up fructifying if that same tone is not carried through. And in some ways, the exit load story is also very close to my heart, because it took so many years, but it feels good that it was implemented. I think taking another leaf out of that chapter, valuation, especially fixed income, was something that we had a very strong voice on, because we just felt that there was too much of arbitrage in the system. And I was delighted to see how the whole thing evolved. And I remember I used to joke that many people would not want me on committees because I perhaps will not say the palatable, kind of things, or perhaps it won't be seen as contribution, because contribution is meant to actually, grow somebody's business, right? And this kind of contribution actually perhaps in the medium term or short term was seen as detraction. And when I look at how that space has evolved, I can definitely, feel good about the fact that I had a small role to play in it. And when I took up my responsibility at CRISIL and I saw it from the other lens, it was great to see the kind of focus and attention the organization had, because on the other side, it was around first principles. And on this side, in this organization, it was also around first principles. And we've had occasion where we've gone ahead and said that this is incorrect, right? Even if it meant that we upset a lot of our clients.
Mm.
The reality is you have to play the long game, because if you play for that over, you run the risk of losing the match. And stewardship is about playing the long game, right? And that's what has been, my guiding principle. And I've been blessed with very good teams that have really helped. For a minute, moving out from what I may have driven, you look around, there are some brilliant examples. You think about investor meetings, making sure that the retail investor and the institutional investor gets information in a timely way. And you think about, this very large mortgage company, they set the tone on the fact that the information will go out, all large investor meetings will be put up on the website. And it's only recently that a lot of it became part of the disclosure rules of SEBI. Or when I think about it, post the IL&FS crisis, the ratings team at CRISIL really moved to work with the regulator to raise the bar. And, we simply shared all the things that we were doing and why it made sense for everybody to follow suit. To make sure you had an outlook before the rating. If you stopped rating somebody, you disclosed that last rating, because otherwise you would have rating shopping, right? And yes, that's a real problem. That only lowers the standards, really. So many examples, and I would say that there are incredible companies out there. Or when you look at some of the large tech companies and yes, the path they've taken on ESG, or if I look, and ESG is one topic that's very close to my heart, and I'm so happy that a lot of the discussions which several of the industry leaders have had, and how the regulator said, okay, now we're going to make these disclosures mandatory. We'll start with giving people some time. And I think that's going to be one of the bedrocks for raising the bar on how companies function. Because environment, social, and governance, to my mind, actually subsume the way the good practices of doing businesses. So that's going to be the big one to watch for in the coming years.
Amazing. Actually, that brings us to probably the key person in the in the conversation, which is the investor. The investor protection is for the investor. So we saved the best for last, actually. While we look at it from a seller should be careful, the manufacturer should be careful, the other people who are involved in the ecosystem should be, the media, the journalists, everybody has a role to play in the communication of many things. But there is also this very clear, beneficiary of this whole, and should be the beneficiary of this whole narrative, which is the consumer, the investor. So many a time, I do correct people's understanding that an investor need not necessarily be buying a product or a service. An investor will be investing into his own life's future. So in that way, we are all investors, and we need to be protected. So from a common man's point of view, I thought I should bring that up, because there is also an element of bottom up when it comes to investor protection. And maybe, to instill that bottom up one of the things that the industry does is very clearly the investor awareness programs, and the changes that came from a regulatory perspective, which mandated investor awareness to be done, which again I believe at some point was a best practice, but now becomes a law. Whether you like it or not, you have to do it. And I guess somewhere that whole thing has changed for the good. Right? I mean, the whole industry benefits. We have seen collective, engagement benefiting every player. So from a bottom-up perspective, because all this while we've been talking top-down, what would be those perspectives you would like to share when it comes to bottom-up?
Sure. Firstly, you're right. And I want to start with that. The investor invests in his or her future, or the family's future. And that's the start point of all investments. Because that's the start point, the investor is responsible and accountable. You can't hand over, you can hand over your money to be managed by the distributor, or you buy directly from the manufacturer. But because it is your money, your life, your family's future, you cannot wash your hands off that. Who washes off their hands from their own future? So if you entrust your money, forget to track it, don't ask all the right questions, then, no one else except the investor needs to be blamed. So the buck of accountability, you can never delegate accountability and responsibility.
You have to own it up for yourself. I'm sorry, I was saying you have to own it up for yourself.
You have to own it up for yourself. And however unaware you might be, it's not difficult to ask questions. And more than anything else, why should you feel pressurized to make that decision there and then? If you've not understood, ask 100 times. If you're unsure, say, come back tomorrow or come back after a week. But don't sign under pressure, right? The third, so accountable, you cannot delegate accountability and responsibility. Yes. The buck stops at you. Second, you have to ask questions. That's your birthright. Third, please don't come under any pressure. Send the distributor away, send the wealth manager away, advisor away to next day, next week, next month. Don't give in to pressure. Fourth, please ask frequently what is happening. And if something is not going in line with what you understood, ask again and monitor and act fast. If you think it's not aligned to what you wanted, make the change. Sometimes, and I've seen so many investors saying, no, exit load lag jayega. I'm saying, for heaven's sake, pay the exit load, get out if it's not the right thing for you. Right? And the last and the most important thing is that make sure that you operate to a plan. Don't wake up one morning and begin to follow the herd. Everybody is buying equities. The markets are on fire. This whole feeling of, the fear of being left out. You call it FOMO, FOLO, whatever. Nowadays, the youth, I think I've become too old, but the youth have fancy abbreviations. For God's sake, there should be no fear of losing out. I would twist it and say, if you have the fear of losing out, be sure you will lose out. Because at some point, there will be a change. See, law of gravity also catches up with markets, right? At some point, there is a correction. So, these to my mind are 5 very, very fundamental principles. And I'm sure, I'm perhaps addressing a lot of people who know it. I'm just verbalizing it as a reminder. I don't think I've offered any pearls of advice or wisdom today, Rajesh. Sorry, I may not have done justice to everything that you perhaps thought I would do in today's fireside chat.
That's very modest of you to say so. We'll make our notes and send it over to you so that you would know what all we learned. Well, Ashu, we are bang on time. In fact, we do have a few more minutes left. And, I just wanted to connect with what you just mentioned, because that's very topical and it's very connected to the World Investor Week, what you just gave out, the 5 points. Because IOSCO, actually on their website, worldinvestorweek.org, they had published key messages that they would like everybody to deliver to investors at large across the world. And in those where, a very simple and a standard theme. Number 1 was, who do you call a smart investor? And one of the lines, and I clearly remember this, was that a smart investor is one who would ignore over-the-top sales pitch, and take his time to understand things and then decide. Precisely what you just said. So I can say either you think like IOSCO or IOSCO thinks like you, whichever way you look at it.
Former has to be. I perhaps understood. And if I didn't, I think I have a problem after having so long.
On the other side, like you mentioned, what I saw very different from the previous years of messages that came out from IOSCO in terms of the expectations, the messages they wanted to deliver across the world. One very interesting thing that came up was that to be careful and to be knowledgeable about crypto and not to fall for scams. And I guess, that's what you also mentioned in passing when you were talking about some of the younger investors. The fear of missing out. The fear
missing
of
out or losing out, yeah.
Whatever you call it, FOMO, follow, whatever you call it. But yahi hai, in the sense that this is what I need to be doing and this is the thing I cannot ignore. And because of which, I do see that, many people are actually ending up losing money. There are, I came across my own relatives who send me very interesting pitch decks, PowerPoint presentations being floated around in a multi-level marketing format, which says that, get 5 people to subscribe to this initial coin offering and you will get X. And you have to yourself buy, for whatever, 75,000, 1 lakh rupees, and get 5 other people to bring the 1 lakh and then you will get something in return. So a lot of that is happening in India. And, I think some of the, messages that go around because of the rates and the changes to these so-called, asset class or assets is questionable, right? I mean, that's something that we wanted to make sure that the public is aware. And thank you for bringing that out. It's been a great delight hosting you today evening, Ashu. It's going to be in our memories for a long time that World Financial Planning Day, thanks to you, got extended as well. So we have an extended celebration.
Thanks so much, Rajesh. My privilege.
So on behalf of all of us, we are a good bunch of over 2,200 certified financial planning professionals in India. The board is also seeing a lot of traction among students and candidates, I would call them, because I see a lot of working executives coming forward, many in asset management space coming forward saying, but I told them very clearly, you might know me, but I don't know the exam. So you as a joke. So I said, I don't sign the pass marks for people. So, we laugh about it, but we are seeing good traction. And the pandemic, in a way, has changed a lot of things for us. We've seen that as well. More and more students are wanting to know and learn more things. More and more professionals are trying to upskill themselves. And somewhere, when I look at it, we had done a survey a few months ago. And in that, we had actually established that the clients want a more collaborative, coaching-based relationship with financial planning professionals. So which means that there's a lot of soft skills that one has to develop. So these are all very interesting times for the profession as well. And I guess, as you develop the soft skills, this session that we had will stand a good, pillar for them, because like you rightly said, if you put the investor protection in your execution, then nothing can go wrong. So thank you so much for that. I would say, even if you didn't call it a 1 hour of wisdom, at least I will say 1 pearl of wisdom. And we'll keep this message going. So on behalf of all of us, a big thank you, Ashu. And I'll hand it back to the back room, and you just watch the brand new video that we've released for the CFP professionals. Thank you once again, Ashu. And for the rest of you who have enjoyed the conversation and taken your notes, a big thank you from both Ashu and me for being here with us. You can always rewind forward and catch us on YouTube after this. One more gentle reminder, we had an excellent conversation with the Secretary General at IOSCO, and that video is up on all our social handles. So please visit our YouTube channel, Facebook, wherever you want to look for it, and you would see, the biggest event that concluded the World Financial Planning Day, a conversation with Martin Molyneux, the IOSCO Secretary General, Noel May, and we had a host of dignitaries who shared their perspectives on the future of the profession. So it's a great piece that I think the industry should not miss. So with that, back to the back room. Thank you. Bye.
Every day, financial planners all over the world help people take control of their financial lives, empowering them to navigate an increasingly complex world, feel more confident, and stay on track to achieve their goals. It all begins with a plan. Financial planning is the process of developing strategies to manage all aspects of your financial situation to help achieve your life goals. And a financial plan is a roadmap to manage it all, including saving, investing, and how to achieve goals such as buying a home, funding education, or securing your retirement. The global community of certified financial planner professionals help people to stay on track with their financial lives. CFP professionals commit to global standards of competence, ethics, and professionalism, and to putting their clients' interests first. People who work with financial planners, particularly those who work with CFP professionals, are better prepared for the financial opportunities that life brings. And those who have a financial plan are 3 times more likely to feel confident about achieving their goals. For a financial planner who has committed to standards of ethics and professionalism, look for the CFP mark. Find a CFP professional to help live your today and plan your tomorrow. Visit Financial Planning Standards Board at fpsb.org to learn more.